Ever since the beginning of human civilization, we as humans have found different substances to become addicted to. Whether we're talking about the cigarette craze of the 1960s that saw the overtake of society, or the acceptance of alcohol into all public places during the early 1900s, and even as far back as the opium epidemic that hit China in the 1800s. And now with legislation that has decreased the consumption of alcohol, and even some laws that prohibit smoking in public places, we as humans have had to turn to a new drug, that is social media. And now I'm sure many of you have read countless articles exploring the adverse effects of social media on mental health. But I am here to tell you that there is a much more sinister and hidden effect, the screen that you are watching social media on. And now with the creation of new short-form content, this addiction has only grown. So in this video, we will be exploring this newfound research and statistics that show how social media has similar and sometimes even worse effects on the human body than drugs do, due to its addiction, its effect on mental health, and its influence on behavior. Now first, there is no doubt that we are on our phones a lot. According to a study done by Josh Howarth, we actually spend 3.5 hours on our phone per day. Now people will argue that this is not due to an addiction because no foreign substances are entering our body, but the research says otherwise. Joris Bearda, a world-leading expert in human-focused design, said, TikTok videos are usually only 15 seconds long, which is just enough time to capture users' attention and create a sense of urgency. This short format makes it easy to keep scrolling and watching video after video as the time commitment is low. The short form of this content makes it possible for people to watch social media for hours without realizing the amount of time that they have spent, so it alters people's perception of time, enabling their consciousness to not be triggered and thus continuing this cycle. So you can see how easily it has been for companies to control this addiction of social media on our brain. But now, how does this addiction affect our brain? Well, first we have to establish a difference between brain health and mental health. When I talk about brain health, I'm talking about the literal health of our brain and the different components, such as receptors. And when I'm talking about mental health, I'm talking about more the state that we feel our mind is in, such as depression. So we can see the screens affect both our mental health and our brain health in two very different ways. First of all, the act of spending 3 to 4 hours on our phones per day is 3 to 4 hours that we are not connecting human-to-human interaction. Now this is very bad, and the Washington Post even says those with close social ties and unhealthful lifestyles, such as smoking, obesity, and lack of exercise, actually lived longer than those with poor social ties but more healthful living. This is pretty strong language, but it really shows the importance of human-to-human interaction, and that is very bad since we have lost that as we have been buried in our phones. And now when it comes to brain health, we see that it is affected by the light from the screen itself. Victoria Dunkley puts it this way when she says, the flashing LED pixels in your phone trigger certain receptors in the brain which can increase certain mood shifts such as an increase in irritability. So basically what she is saying is that the more we watch our phone, the more it's changing our mind and increasing these different emotions such as irritability. All of these effects on the brain beg the question, is there any other external behavioral traits that we can see from this change in our brain? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. We see scientists Elena Neofuto and Lori Manuel say, earlier and longer exposure to electronic media is associated with an increased risk of psychiatric symptomology, particularly those of attentional problems and hyperactivity, anxiety disorders, and depression. But now, don't get this wrong, this doesn't just solely affect anxiety, but also increases violence in children. And in an article put out by the National Library of Medicine, They say children and adolescents who spend most of their time watching television are at greater risk for violent behavior, including physical fight, victim, and bully. And we see that these problems only continue to increase over time as more parents decide to get a job and we see more dual income houses. So children are given screens to entertain themselves. This then leads to an increase of bullying in our schools, which then leads to a decrease in the mental health of other students, thus continuing this cycle. But it's important to not label this as solely a youth epidemic, because in the same article that I mentioned before by the National Library of Medicine, they talk about how this violent behavior can increase in people of all ages due to an increase in screen time. Therefore, it is becoming even more imperative to limit screen time, both for sanity and for the safety of those around us. So it's easy to see that this is becoming a nationwide epidemic. And as ironic as it is, you are watching this on a screen right now, and you probably didn't even think twice about it. This is because screens have taken over every aspect of our society. The simple act of forgetting your cell phone becomes a day-ruining act. Reliance on your phone is not the main issue, but rather the habitual dependence on it for entertainment. We see many of these exact same talking points used in essays to discourage the use of drugs because we see that social media has turned into this generation's drug of choice. Its addiction, effect on mental health, and influence on behavior should all classify it as a drug to the human body. But since even our government and politicians have become dependent on screens, such as for campaigning, it is up to us to make the change. So I challenge each one of you for the next 3 weeks to stay completely off social media so that you can retrain your brain to not open those social media apps every time you pull out your phone. And by the end, you'll have broken that habit and you'll become a better person. Together, it may not be possible because our society, like I said, needs screens. But together, you can make a change for your brain for the better.